Picture a young ruler from a forgotten corner of the world, a prince of a small vassal tribe tucked away somewhere in the dusty highlands of southwestern Iran. A man nobody took seriously. And yet, in less than 20 years, this man would bring 3 mighty empires to their knees, forge the largest state the world had ever seen, and change the course of history in ways that are still felt today. This is the story of Cyrus the Great, the founder of the Persian Empire. Cyrus was born around 590 BC in the province of Persis, what we now call Fars, in southwestern Iran. At that time, his homeland was little more than a backwater province, swallowed up inside the much larger Median Empire. His family were local chieftains, yes, but they answered to the king of the Medes. They bowed, they obeyed. They were, in every meaningful sense, subjects. But there's a legend, and ancient history loves its legends, about how Cyrus came into this world. According to the Greek historian Herodotus, Cyrus was actually the grandson of Astyages, the king of the Medes himself. And before the child was even born, Astyages had a dream, a terrible, haunting dream that told him his own grandson would one day rise up and take his throne. So Astyages did what fearful kings have always done. He ordered the baby killed. But the man tasked with carrying out this order couldn't bring himself to do it. Instead, he handed the infant to a shepherd and his wife, telling them to finish the job. And they too looked at this child and couldn't go through with it. They raised him instead, quietly, secretly, as if he were their own son. And years later, when the boy became a man, the prophecy came true. He dethroned the king. Now, is this story true? Almost certainly not. It echoes the myth of Oedipus, and it follows a pattern we see repeated across ancient cultures. The hero of humble beginnings, the king who tries to cheat fate, and fate winning anyway. In reality, we know almost nothing about Cyrus's childhood. What we do know is this. Around 558 BC, Cyrus succeeded his father, Cambyses I, and became king of the Persians, still a vassal, still bowing to the Medes, but not for long. Around 553 BC, Cyrus did something that no one expected. He rebelled. He raised his banner against the Median king, his overlord, and went to war. It was a bold, almost reckless gamble, and it took 3 long years of fighting. But when the dust settled, it was Cyrus who stood victorious. Now here's what makes this conquest particularly interesting. The Medes and the Persians were closely related peoples. They spoke similar languages. They shared customs, traditions, laws. And Cyrus was shrewd enough to understand this. He didn't tear down the Median system. He didn't humiliate the defeated. Instead, he kept most of the Median laws in place, preserved much of the existing administration, and presented his takeover not as a foreign conquest, but as a change of dynasty, a seamless transition, almost elegant in its efficiency. But Cyrus wasn't done, not even close. His gaze turned westward, toward Asia Minor, where the wealthy Lydian Empire gleamed under the rule of King Croesus, a man so famously rich that his name became a proverb. You've probably heard the expression, rich as Croesus. Well, this was that Croesus. But all the gold in Lydia couldn't stop what was coming. Cyrus marched his armies west, and around 546 BC, he defeated Croesus, conquered Lydia, and took the legendary king prisoner. Iron had beaten gold. Then Cyrus turned east. Campaign after campaign, he swept through the vast stretches of eastern Iran, absorbing territory after territory into his growing empire. By 540 BC, the Persian Empire reached all the way to the Indus River in India and northward to the Jaxartes, what we know today as the Syr Darya. deep into Central Asia. And now, with his flanks secured, Cyrus set his sights on the greatest prize of all, Babylon. The Babylonian Empire was the jewel of the ancient world. It controlled Mesopotamia, the cradle of civilization, and the entire Fertile Crescent. It was rich, ancient, and powerful, but it had a weakness, and that weakness had a name, Nabonidus. The Babylonian king had lost the love of his people. He was unpopular, disconnected, and when Cyrus's armies came marching toward the gates of Babylon in 539 BC, the city's defenders looked at each other and made a choice. They didn't fight. Babylon, one of the greatest cities in the history of humanity, surrendered without a single battle. And just like that, Cyrus walked through its gates as its new master. With Babylon came Syria. With Syria came Palestine. The entire Fertile Crescent now belonged to Persia. Think about that for a moment. In the span of roughly 2 decades, a vassal prince from an obscure tribe had built the largest empire the world had ever known. It stretched from the shores of the Mediterranean all the way to India. Nothing like it had existed before. Cyrus spent the years that followed doing what few conquerors ever bother to do. He organized, he consolidated, he built systems of governance that could hold this massive empire together. And then, with the restlessness that seems to live in every great conqueror's bones, he set out once more, this time against the Massagetae, fierce nomadic tribes roaming the steppes of Central Asia, east of the Caspian Sea. The first clash went in Cyrus's favor, but the second battle, fought in 529 BC, did not. The Massagetae struck back with devastating force, and in that fight, Cyrus, the ruler of the greatest empire on earth, fell. He was killed on the battlefield, far from the grand cities he had conquered, far from the throne he had built. His son, Cambyses II, took the throne after him. He avenged his father by crushing the Massagetae in a punitive campaign, then carried Cyrus's body back to Pasargadae, the ancient Persian capital, where it was laid to rest. Cambyses would go on to conquer Egypt, completing the unification of the entire ancient Middle East under Persian rule. But what truly sets Cyrus apart from so many other conquerors, what makes him more than just another warlord with a sharp sword, is what he did with the power he held. He was tolerant. In an age when empires ruled through terror, Cyrus chose a different path. He respected local religions. He honored local customs. He didn't burn cities to the ground or drag entire populations into exile. The Babylonians and the Assyrians before him had been ruthless. They had massacred thousands, uprooted whole civilizations, and scattered them across distant lands just to prevent rebellion. Cyrus did the opposite. When the Babylonians had conquered Judea in 586 BC, they had deported a large portion of the Jewish population to Babylon. For 50 years, these people lived in exile, clinging to their identity, their faith, their memory of home. And then Cyrus conquered Babylon, and he let them go. He permitted the Jews to return to their homeland. Stop and consider what this means. Without that single decision, the Jewish people might have dissolved into history, absorbed into the Babylonian population, lost as a distinct group forever. The ripple effects of that moment stretch across millennia, through the rise of Christianity, through the emergence of Islam, through the entire shape of Western civilization. Was Cyrus motivated purely by kindness? Maybe not entirely. There was likely political calculation behind it. A loyal, grateful population on the western edge of his empire served his interests well. But the result was the same. And even the Greeks, who would spend generations locked in conflict with the Persian Empire, couldn't help but admire him. Cyrus laid the foundations of an empire that outlasted him by 2 centuries. 200 years of relative peace and prosperity until Alexander the Great finally brought it down. And even then, the story didn't truly end. After Alexander's death, his general Seleucus took control of much of the former Persian territories, but foreign rule over Iran didn't last. In the middle of the 3rd century BC, a revolt led by Arsaces I, who claimed descent from Cyrus's own Achaemenid dynasty, gave rise to the Parthian state, which eventually reclaimed Iran and Mesopotamia. And after the Parthians came the Sassanids, another Persian dynasty also claiming Achaemenid blood, whose empire endured for more than 4 centuries. The thread that Cyrus started kept weaving itself through history, century after century. And here is perhaps the deepest significance of what Cyrus accomplished. His career marks a true turning point, not just in the history of one region, but in the history of the world. For more than 25 centuries before Cyrus, Mesopotamia had been the center of everything. The Sumerians, the Akkadians, the Babylonians, the Assyrians, these Semitic and Sumerian civilizations had made Mesopotamia the richest, most culturally advanced place on Earth. Egypt stood alongside it, but no one else came close. Cyrus ended that chapter. After him, Mesopotamia and Egypt were no longer the center of power. The Semitic peoples who had dominated the Fertile Crescent for millennia would not regain their independence for over 1,000 years. After the Persians came the Greeks, then the Parthians, then the Romans, then the Sassanids, all Indo-European peoples, all ruling over lands that had once belonged to Semitic civilizations. It wasn't until the Muslim conquests of the 7th century, nearly 1,200 years after Cyrus, that Semitic peoples reclaimed control of the Fertile Crescent. Cyrus sits right at the midpoint of recorded history, and he marks the moment when the ancient world pivoted, when power shifted, when the old order crumbled, and when a new chapter began. And perhaps the most remarkable thing about all of this is that none of it was predictable. A generation before Cyrus was born, no one, not a single soul, would have guessed that an obscure tribe from the hills of southwestern Iran was about to reshape the entire world. There were no great socioeconomic forces pointing in that direction. There was no inevitable tide of history carrying Persia to greatness. There was just a man, a brilliant, bold, and unusually compassionate man who seized his moment and changed everything. That was Cyrus the Great.